Chris Anderson in St. Lo.
This is Chris Anderson in St. Lo. Conrick Buyer in St. Lo.
St. Lo.
Holy cow.
I know. We don't get to do this too often when we're sitting next to each other.
Well, they kicked us out of when I lost the studio, so we have to share now. We're hot bunking studio space.
Well, listen, hi guys. Welcome everyone to History Happy Hour, brought to you with the help of Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours. And guess what we're doing right now?
We're
on a tour.
We're on a surprise.
We're on the Stephen Ambrose Tours Masterclass Tour. Yes. And how's it going?
I think it's going really well so far. We had it's a little bit chilly.
Yeah.
But we've seen awesome sites that folks normally don't get to see, and I think the guests are enjoying it. And weather's been pretty good.
Yeah, but it hasn't ever really. At one time, it rained on us.
Yeah.
And we've been covering. This is about the Normandy Breakout, so we've been covering things sort of starting June 7th and going to the end till August 22nd.
So we're late July now, right? Late July.
We're on July 24th.
All right.
That's where it is right at the moment. And tomorrow's my day.
I know. Right? See, I noticed that.
You notice the excitement level rising in the bus.
You should have seen him when he got to grab the front seat on the bus this afternoon. You were so excited.
I was very excited. Yeah. And listen, whether you are watching live or watching on replay or listening to the HHH podcast, thank you for joining us. Today we're going to be talking about our masterclass. And in fact, we're going to give you some glimpses and scenes from the masterclass so you can sort of see what all of the historians are up to. All of the historians except for
you, I noticed.
Right?
Yeah.
Carefully planned here because my first day is tomorrow. And but we're going to give you a chance to kind of visit some of the places we visited and see how that goes for us. So let us know you're here. Yeah. Let us know what you're drinking. And anything else you want to say before we get up to full speed?
Make sure you tell Rick that he should record himself so we can play that.
So we'll get Matt to record me doing something, and we'll play that at the end of the show next week.
Okay.
Okay.
Right.
Because I don't want to miss that opportunity.
I know.
To be a star. All right. So I think we've been
yes,
BSing our way along, and so I think you can start us on the open of the show.
Okay.
Okay. Hey, so the bar is open.
The bar is finally open.
Yeah, the bar is open. And actually, we're waiting for the bar to really open in real life so we can get down there and have a drink. But the first thing we wanted to do today, because it really does help start our story off, is a piece of commentary from Hugh MacDonald-Buchanan about the artificial Mulberry Harbor at Arromanches, at Port Winston.
And you know why we did that? Because Hugh's got a very posh accent. It
yes.
makes us all sound smarter.
And the show immediately gets more interesting and a little brighter and funnier when Hugh comes along.
Absolutely.
See what you think.
Right in front of you is Mulberry Harbour. Today there's only one harbour. There was originally two of these. One, of course, was for the Americans, which was anchored at Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer on Omaha Beach. This is the British one. The American one had the code name Mulberry A. The British had the code name Mulberry B. Today it's known as Port Winston. But this is, I think, key to the whole of the strategy of the invasion. We've been talking about the logistical requirements to win the battle of the build-up. It is quite possible that the Allies would have thought twice about landing an invasion force here in Normandy if they couldn't have had temporary landing facilities for men, kit, goods, guns and material and all the rest of it until such time they'd succeeded in taking Cherbourg Harbour, which is a deep water port. So this is critical to the strategic thinking for the whole of the planning of the invasion here in Normandy. And if you look at it from the enemy's point of view, They always knew that Cherbourg would probably be a target if anything happened in this sector. But one of the reasons that they laid as much weight to the deception plan, you know, the great plan whereby the Allies deceived the Germans that they were in fact going to land on the Pas-de-Calais, is the Germans understood this logistical equation and said they really don't have enough port or landing facilities to sustain an invasion on the scale that be required to bring America, Britain and their allies back onto the continent and continue the invasion of France. So this thinking from both sides is really important as to why we're here in the first place. If you look in front of you, you'll see that the harbour is described a semicircular shape. Now you'll see some massive concrete blocks. These were known as caissons. These formed the outer breakwater, and the idea was to make a clearer, sheltered water inlet behind them so you could start offloading stuff. Now, quite a lot of the port has disappeared, and it had several components. And I'll try and explain those components to you now. In order for there to be clearish sheltered water to sink the concrete blocks that you're looking at, the Allies actually sank a number of obsolete large ships, merchant ships, battleships, which started sailing across the channel on D-Day itself. These were going to be sunk on all the beaches, in fact. So there were going to be some sunk on Sword, Juno, Gold, Omaha and Utah to provide clear water there. But here they had a particular task. They were going to start that semicircular shape, and the big concrete blocks that you see were being towed the day after these ships came across, and they're placed in position on the side that you're standing on now, that is to say the near side of the sunken ships. Those blocks you're looking at are hollow. They were floated across. The stopcocks on the side of the concrete blocks were open. The water was let in, and they sunk down to the bottom, which is where they still remain. They were then filled with sand to give them extra weighted ballast. Their code name was Phoenix. And the reason the code name was Phoenix is these things have been sunk twice. They were sunk in the United Kingdom before they came out here. The fear of the planners was that German reconnaissance aircraft would see these vast blocks being created in British ports and tumble to the idea that they might be used for a portable harbour. So they were sunk in the UK, water's then pumped out, and they were then brought over here. Owing to their size, you could do other things with these blocks, like put defending units on them, so they had anti-aircraft guns, and they were also designed to be a defended perimeter. There were large gaps in them, of course, to allow large shipping to come in and start offloading. There were 4 platforms. 2 of them were very close together, pretty much opposite the harbour, as I say, halfway between low tide in the outer blocks, and those 2 platforms were linked to Armagh harbour by the floating platforms that we saw when we were coming alongside in the coach. They floated because they were floating on panels, concrete panels, which themselves were anchored to the base of the sea, to the base of the ocean. Those 2 took the brunt of landing general kit, lorries, men and so forth. So what were the other 2 for? And they were slightly separate away from those 2. Well, one furthest to the west, anchored into Armagh, was for ammunition. So very sensibly, they kept anything that might explode rather more separate from the other landing bays. Another one ahead of you and to the right hand side didn't offload into the harbour. It offloaded directly onto Gold Beach. That was the quickest way they thought of getting tanks and heavy kit ashore without it lumbering through the port and creating traffic jams. So it was a separate offloading bay on the beaches. And while this is an operation, don't forget that all the beaches will also be used for offloading stuff. It was ready for action almost completely by the 18th of June. It had already started shipping stuff, but it was getting to the level, excuse me, where they could offload something in the region of 10,000 tons of stuff per day, in addition to the stuff that was being landed on the beaches, and the American harbour is being completed around about the same time. And then, as I'm sure a lot of you know, on the 19th, there was a terrific storm that lasted for 4 days, gale force 8, and it smashed into both of the Mulberry harbours. Admiral Ramsay, the gentleman in charge of the whole of Operation Neptune, which was responsible for delivering the landings, obviously knew that this was on the way, and he'd given instructions that all the loose shipping that had been used to service the beaches, landing craft or whatever, be put inside Mulberry Harbour for shelter. But even so, that storm ripped in from the northeast, tore into the harbour, and it smashed up the floating runways. It smashed up a lot of the landing craft. So this harbour was put out of action for somewhere in the, well, nearly a week. And just give you an indication of what that means for operations on the ground. At that time, Montgomery and Dempsey were planning a big attack on the Caen area, which we'll be talking about tomorrow, called Operation Epsom. This is going to be have a core. It's going to involve 60,000 men. He wanted to launch that attack a week earlier, or just under a week earlier, actually. And what had happened in that intervening time was the storm wasn't preventing the Germans moving into the area. So the storm gave cover for German troops moving into the front line. So the storm and logistics and the way in which the storm affected logistics having a really important impact on military manoeuvres. And in the American sector, looking at the American historians, at the time that the assault on Cherbourg is happening, the American troops that have cut across the Cotentin Peninsula and are now facing south, their artillery units are reduced to the ration of 25 shells per day. So this begins to illustrate, I think, yet again, how important the logistical equation is. We haven't talked about the American Mulberry Harbour. The storm that came through smashed it to smithereens. It literally picked up the blocks, hurled them on the beach, and caused enormous destruction. And it came across the southeast of England with its azimuth, its centre axis, straight through the Dover Straits, came from that direction straight down the English Channel, whack into the two Mulberries. Well, why did this one survive and the other one didn't survive? There's been all sorts of theories have been contested. They've also become the object, I think, of national politics. So some of the engineers said, well, you put it in badly. And the Americans said, no, we didn't put it in badly. We did exactly the same way as you did over there. But there's a professor of meteorology at Oxford who's recreated the weather pattern because he wanted to see what happens to the waves in the English Channel. He came up with the theory that out there's deeper water than there is, deeper water closer inland than there is at Omaha Beach. And that, he led to speculate, means that the waves on Omaha Beach were far taller, far greater, and therefore far more destructive than they were at Mulberry Harbour. Here. I think that's an open case, but for the moment I'm going with that one on the basis that the only person who could have been politically prejudiced at the time was he on high.
So who is the man on high?
God.
So he's saying that God would be
The only person that can say whether it was the right decision.
Okay, I thought it was Winston Churchill.
Yeah, no, I don't think so.
I
I
don't
think when you go like this,
okay,
that tends
it was
to be,
definitely,
yeah.
okay, just obviously losing a little bit in the.
And it translates. Well, it's that posh accent.
I know. It really captured me.
Good.
Our second piece today is from Matt Broggie.
Yep.
Actually recorded it yesterday morning, and he's in. How do you say the name of that town?
Emavay.
He's in Emavay for It's actually a story that starts on June 6th, but then turns into an investigation.
Yeah,
and it goes on longer.
Yeah, and I think it's certainly a story that deserves more attention that I'd never been made aware of. And
really, yeah, and there is a marker there, and you'll see it in the piece, but not a place that I think very many people visit. When we pulled up there with the bus, the incident is called the Emavay Massacre. it's American soldiers who get massacred.
Yeah.
And when we pulled up in the bus, it was awfully quiet.
Awfully quiet. Yes,
So.
but it's one of the great advantages of these master classes. We do get to kind of check out stuff like this. So.
Yeah, well, one of the coolest things that we do is that we're visiting all these places that either we've never been to or never taken people to, and so never really had to do the research and go into detail on some of this stuff. So that's been pretty exciting to be listening and learning. So here's Matt Broggie.
June 6th on D-Day. There is a stick of paratroopers. A stick is a plane load of paratroopers from the 507th Parachute Infantry Regiment Headquarters Company of the 82nd Airborne Division. Okay, they are well off course. Just story of the jumps on D-Day, as many of you are familiar with. They the one stick will land around the village of Emave, and the lieutenant, his name is Shutt. Lieutenant Shutt quickly recognizes that they are completely lost because there's no other paratroopers around them. They're completely isolated. They missed their drop zone by 4 miles. Okay, and so what he does, he assembles the men that he can find, and then he gathers them in these woods right here. So 14 men jump, 12 assemble in these woods here. Shutt will send out a 3-man patrol under a private first class named Ashton Landry. Landry and the 2 other paratroopers go to this farm. This is La Castelle. That's the name of the farm. They go in there. Landry is from Louisiana. He speaks French. So he knocks on the door and he speaks to the family here. And they're trying to figure out where they are, get some information to bring back to Shutt, who's waiting here in the woods. As they were having this conversation with the French family, they start hearing hobnails coming down the street. And hobnails are what keep German boots together. They're the rivets, the little nails that go into German boots. The sound is very distinct. So that's a giveaway that there's a patrol coming down the road. The family quickly hides those 3 paratroopers in their loft, in their barn loft, just on the corner up here. Somehow the Germans it's a 12-man patrol, and those 12 Germans get tipped off that there's something going on in these woods. We don't know for sure, but they march down this road, they come through this gate, and they go towards the woods. They know something's going on. We don't know why they know that, but somehow they figure out that something's going on in the woods. There is one wounded paratrooper who got wounded, who actually broke his pelvis on the jump. And so he's laying on the eastern edge of the tree line, while the remaining 8 paratroopers, led by Shutt, are taking positions because they see the Germans coming. They take positions on the western edge of the woods. And as the Germans get into the woods, they find Private Wandel, who's the wounded paratrooper with the broken pelvis. He's high on morphine. He's kind of tripping out. And they start questioning him and yelling at him. And they see the paratrooper patch and the uniform. And so they're asking him, where's the rest of you? Where's the rest of your unit? And in that moment, that's when Shutt opens fire. It's a quick firefight. The Germans are able to get into the backside of the wood line, and the 3 of the men are beaten to death. It descends into hand-to-hand combat, and then as that happens, Shutt will surrender. Somehow the Germans are able to envelop them, and they force them to surrender after beating 3 of them to death. So now there are 6 paratroopers alive who are taken prisoner, including Wandel. Meanwhile, Landry and the 2 others hear the firefight. They move down the lane into that complex there, and they are watching Shutt and the others get taken prisoner, and the 6 of them are led out the cattle gate, down back to the village, and into that chateau that which we'll visit in just a second, or past the church into the chateau, which is where the headquarters is for the German garrison here in Emave. After that, that firefight takes place about 6 a.m. Okay, just give you a timetable during the day. The 3 paratroopers who were beaten to death, and I'll explain why we know that in a minute. But their names are Robert Watson, Daniel Tillman, and Andrew Kling. Their bodies are left in the woods. The 6 remaining are taken and interrogated at the headquarters at the chateau. After they're done being interrogated, Schutt, the officer, is taken to a prisoner of war camp. Wandel, the man with the broken pelvis, he is taken to a field hospital. Okay. So now the prisoners were led after their interrogation. The prisoners were led up this road and through the cattle gate at gunpoint into the woods, where the 4 of them were shot in the back of the head. So Renault goes into there either to investigate or to get firewood, but then that's where he discovers the 6 bodies. Okay, I'm sorry, correction, 7 bodies. The 3 men who were beaten in the firefight, and then the 4 who were executed. Pierre Renault will go and contact the mayor's assistant. His name is Launay. Launay comes up and sees the bodies, and at that point he either goes to the commanding officer, the German commanding officer. Somehow he makes contact with the German officer, the German major. His name is Major Felix, and Felix orders him, we don't know why, but Felix orders Launay to bury the bodies. So we take the bodies and bury them. And so what Launay will do, he will take the bodies into the church cemetery and he buries them there. Then, June 17th, 11 days later, is when the 7th Corps elements reach Emeve, and the Germans evacuate. Launay quickly finds someone to tell this story to, and he turns over all the personal effects of the men. And they explain that Pierre Renault, the guy who was on his bicycle, he saw 4 unarmed men being led into the woods. And then they explain the gunshots, and they saw the wounds and the head wounds, and so they say that they determined that there was a war crime committed on D-Day. So that gets the attention all the way. It goes all the way up to Schaeff. Schaeff will launch an investigation, and on June 22nd, the 1st Army Inspectors General Division will send an investigation team here, and they will interview the French civilians. They will exhume the bodies and investigate the type of wounds. And this is all part of the investigation team. Includes 2 photographers, one with a still camera and one with the motion picture camera. So the investigation team goes into the woods. They will recreate the march, or the prisoners being led into the woods up the lane here, up the road. And then they get into the woods and they start marking where they figure out where the bodies were laid, and they marked each body's position with a paper from a pocket notebook. They mark it A, B, C, D, and E, and F. So this investigation gets underway, and the name Felix keeps coming up in the interviews, and all the transcripts say, like, all the French civilians are being interviewed. Landry and the 2 other paratroopers are taken off the line because they escape to San Mary-Glise, and they hook up with the rest of the 82nd Airborne. They get taken off the line and brought back to Emeve for this investigation, and they all explain what they saw. And in the end, Felix gets captured in Cherbourg. And so he's interrogated, and he's a part of this court inquiry. And all he does is deny any association with the order for the executions that took place here. He says, if I turned the prisoners over, and whatever happened to them after that point, it was not my responsibility. And so in the end, there's no convictions for this event. Nobody gets convicted. the 4 men that were executed: Private Robert Werner, Private Delmar C. McElhaney, Private Anthony Hitz Taylor, and PFC Ellsworth Heck. Okay.
Somber.
Yeah, I mean it's tough to hear some of that stuff, and to imagine what that was like for those guys in that quiet little field. But
Glad we got to share the names of them with you.
yeah, and let's try to remember them.
Yep, absolutely.
The next piece is from Chris Anderson.
Oh no.
Yes,
Really?
yeah.
Is he any good?
Well, he needs work.
Okay.
It takes
I'll
a
let him
long
know.
time to.
Does he?
Yeah.
You look kind of long-winded.
Well, he's talking about very important stuff.
Oh, yeah. Well, Canadians, obviously.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Surprise.
So, Chris, you want to set up the
Yeah,
piece here
well,
you're
we're
doing
talking
here?
about Operation Spring, which was a Canadian operation launched July 25th, 1944, and it was launched in conjunction with the Operation Cobra, so the more famous American operation, and it turns out to be kind of one of the darkest days in Canadian military history, and it's something I've always been really fascinated by. So we spent some time talking about the Black Watch of Canada and their attack on July 25th.
All right, guys, so there's a whole lot to unpack here. Where we're standing now is a place called Point 67. Obviously, you can see a pretty strategically important area. Montgomery's starting to take a lot of heat. Eisenhower's getting very impatient, and it's getting kind of tricky. And this major operation that Montgomery had invested so much in has kind of fallen on his ass. So, what Montgomery proposes is what will be called Operation Spring. And this is going to be, the point of Operation Spring is to accomplish what Goodwood didn't. But what he sells it as is a way to support Operation Cobra, because Bradley's going to make his big attempt to break out. And so he tells Eisenhower, maybe by securing victory in the West, in the East, we'll win a victory in the West. We have to help out Brad. And the job is given to Guy Simons, who commands 2nd Canadian Corps. Simons is a Monty protege. And when he takes command of the Corps, he tells all of his subordinate commanders, you play the music, I'll take care of the variations. And basically the idea kind of spreads throughout the Corps that you just do what I tell you to do. There's going to be very little personal initiative or anything like that, so that's going to be allowed to be exercised by these guys as they go into the attack. And that's going to kind of be a major problem. So what Simons is going to try to do is launch a night attack early morning attack, excuse me, on the 25th to try to take advantage of that. Now, that's great if there had been time to really prepare people and develop a plan, et cetera, but it's all very hastily done. The terrain is not really great. One of the things we're going to see later on that afternoon when the Black Watch goes in, there's wheat fields all around here, shoulder high. So it's just going to be a difficult thing to move across. But the attack is going to go in, launch from this point in that direction, and this is the general axis of advance. So the left side of the road going this way. One of the guys says that when they're going to use searchlights to light up the night. And he said, we started advancing into the town, and all of a sudden the searchlights go up. And he said it was a little like crossing the living room in your underwear and somebody throwing on the lights. You felt very, very alone all of a sudden.
It was very specific.
It was very specific. I didn't like that one, Eric, for some reason. But so they're going in to the attack quickly breaks down because they can't coordinate the advance. The darkness doesn't really protect them. It just makes things more difficult to move through. Tanks and infantry get separated. And the Calgarys get into St. Martin and they start to have a very, very nasty fight. And I should also say that the 5th Battalion of the Black Watch, they are going to be the follow-on force here. They're supposed to launch an attack go through this town and hit the next town down the road. And they're told that this has already been cleared, so don't worry about it. You just go through here to your start line, and that's where your attack will jump off from. As they go down the road, of course, it hasn't been cleared, and right out of the gate, they take about 60 casualties going through the town before they can even get to their jump-off position. And amongst the casualties they take are their battalion commander and their second in command. So the guy that's given command of the Black Watch is a guy named Griffin. He's an 8 company commander. They said he's very good, he's very competent, et cetera, but he's all of a sudden like, hey, guess what? They're going to lead an attack. Right? So and the other problem, so he's trying to sort out what's going to go on. The next village down the road is Mace-sur-Orne, and we'll be down there in a little bit. And Mace-sur-Orne is supposed to be his jump-off point. The initial plan is to use the road to take tanks, drive down the road, and basically hook a left. And he decides that he doesn't want to do that. He thinks it's going to take too long. He's losing the darkness. The sun is coming up soon, so what was supposed to be an early morning sort of dawning attack is now a broad daylight attack. And because Simons is so strict and doctrinal as far as his plan, it's a very World War I tactic. He has a fire plan that at certain periods of time, the barrage will lift and it will move forward, and you follow the barrage. Well, that's great, but if you miss the bus, so this is all happening very quickly. He's just been thrown into command. So the brigadier, the 5th Brigade commander, a guy named McGill, comes up and he says, "What's your plan?" And they have this hellacious argument here. McGill says, "If you're supposed to go down the road, you've got armor support." Griffin says, "Well, no, because it's busy." I think that, and the brigade commander says, but there are Germans in the town, and they'll hit you in the flank. He says, "Well, no, it's just I sent a patrol in. They encountered one machine gun. The cavalry's are going to take care of it. I'm going to cut across the field. Up, that's the Verrières Ridge." And Griffin had a very good reputation. McGill doesn't want to undercut him right as he's going into command. He seems to have what they would call grip on the situation. He's a little bit unsure, but he says okay. So Griffin will hastily get his unit together and come from down this road through St. Martin and then to Mace-sur-Orne to try to get to his jump-off line. And I should say a little bit more about the Black Watch. At this point, they've taken 60 casualties, okay, in the village just here, like I said, including their battalion commander and the best company commander. So at this point, the battalion is 320 people, all souls. So that's 4 companies plus a headquarters company, basically. And they're all going to go. A little bit about the Black Watch. They said that you should know about the Black Watch. It's sort of the senior militia regiment in the Canadian Army. It performed really magnificently in World War I. It has the most highly decorated unit in the Canadian Army in World War I. 6 Victoria Crosses were won by members of the regiment. So why does that matter? Well, they come back and they've got everybody else in the Canadian Army says these guys have got a bit of attitude. There's the Army way and then there's the Black Watch way. There's this really big, great sense of the pride of the regiment. And I think it's a concept that a lot of people now, especially civilians, have a hard time understanding, but that is a very real thing to these guys. If you are a member of the Black Watch, you are a member of the best of the best. And all your officers are of the elite from Montreal, and all the NCOs are middle class, and the riflemen are all working class kids, but they're all like, we are with the Black Watch. So I guess why I say that is if you're a more experienced commander, or if you've been in combat since June 6th, you go, you know something? This attack is going nowhere. There are still Germans in this town. The artillery's moving forward, and I just took command. And they said the Griffin was like, no, it's the Black Watch, and we're going to do it. So he's going to get his men down into town. But they are fighting all the way down this road until they even get to their jump-off point to begin their attack. Right, so they're attacking to get to the attack. So where we are now was called La Cite de la Mine. So this is where that mine was located. And it's kind of a light industrial thing, but they said that there were smokestacks with bridges connecting them. And so they begin to assemble here. Griffiths comes back, and on his way back, just on the road where we turned left, he sees a blown up Bren gun carrier and one of the company's forward artillery observer teams gone. So now they started with 3, now they're down to 2. By the time he gets up here, because they have taken shell fire, one more FOO section is gone. So it had been 3 forward artillery observer teams are now 1 forward artillery observer team. Again, these are the guys that are supposed to provide you immediate on-the-spot fire support. So now there's only 1 team left. The grass here again is shoulder high. And so these guys are here, and this was a cabbage patch. So the grass will start just beyond the cabbage patch. They said they assembled in a cabbage patch. And Griffith tells his company commanders, and I should say that there's very little in the way of instruction provided to the men, right? But the company commanders said, look, we think that the Calgaries are going to take May-sur-Orne, which is down the road this way. We want to get Fontenoy-Marmion, which is just over this ridge line. So rather than go down the road, Griffith says, I want to do this quick because I'm getting pressure from Simons all the way down. They're like, you got to go. You got to move. So again, a more experienced battalion commander would have had an argument. But these guys are like, well, we're the Black Watch, damn it. And so rather than go down the road, and I should also add that if he'd gone down the road, he was supposed to have armored support. He said rather than do that, he's going to cut across this field to try to skirt May-sur-Orne and get into Fontenoy-Marmion. He thinks it'll take him about 20 minutes. So he gives them in the order, and the order goes out amongst all these guys, fix bayonets. And so the 2 quotes I want to read here, I think are, I don't know, kind of telling. There's a guy named Bruce Duckett, and when Bruce is given the order, he explains to the guys around him, he said, I thought, God almighty, this is fucking stupid. What are we doing? This isn't World War I. Right. And they said that the other guys, it was almost silent. They have a sense that this isn't going to be the best thing when the order goes to get. And they said some guys just started like doing the rosary. Some guys were praying. They said a lot of guys went up to a hedge to empty their bowels because they didn't want to get wounded with full bladders. And then Griffith steps out in front of his battalion. He's just taken command of. He said they're in box formation. So you have a square of companies, and then within those company squares of men. And he raises his arm and he says, Black Watch, forward. And they advance into the wheat, and they're all advancing at high port. And they said that all that you could see were their shoulders and the tops of their heads. And they're going to start advancing across this field.
What time of day?
This is 9 in the morning. So it's now, again, it's broad daylight. The attack was supposed to go in at dawn, but it's now broad daylight. So the tank support doesn't get up because it starts to run into German tanks that are still farting around in this area. So he's lost his armored support. The rolling barrage has rolled too far forward, and he's lost 2 of his 3 forward observation teams. You can all see that this is starting to come apart very quickly. a guy named Hook Wilkinson says about this, and he was asked, he was reflecting on as they're advancing through the wheat here. He says, July 25th was the most memorable day of my life. There's not a day I wake up in the morning and do not think of it. It's still a day of reckoning for me. So I just kind of picture these guys, you know, heading right up the hill. And that, and then the high ground in the distance, that's 0.67 where we started. And then just beyond that, Con. Again, they think that the Calgaries are coming behind them to secure Macer Orne, and they haven't. So as they begin to come up the rise, Macer Orne is full of Germans. This ridge line here is full of Germans. And there are Germans in Fontenoy-Marmion, which is their ultimate objective down here. So basically, they're walking into, this is the charge of the Light Brigade. There is a German officer I mentioned earlier, a Lieutenant Peter Preen, and he had been a Panther driver that got knocked out, and he's put in charge of a detachment of Mark IVs. So he's in the town, and he can see them advancing, and he says a body of infantry of considerable strength, about 300 to 400 men, began advancing from the area of St. Martin de Fontenoy, ready for this assault. This was most impressive and perplexing, he recalled. The soldiers marched upright, holding their rifles across their breasts in readiness as if on a drill square. Then just as they get to the top of the rise, again where that hedge is, this is a passage from this book here. David does a very good job of describing the moment the attack begins, so I'm just going to read his words. Almost like this. In one furious thunderclap, the full might of German firepower assembled over the previous 5 days opened up in this textbook defensive operation of war. The first salvos from 81 and 120 millimeter mortars crashed down in a curtain of steel behind Griffin's tactical headquarters and the trailing companies, effectively cutting off the battalion from the Canadian lines in any withdrawal route. So what they're going to do now is they're going to drive them into the ambush. It's like beating partridges. From defilade positions on the flanks, machine guns sighted on fixed lines cut swaths into the wheat at knee level and with scythe-like precision tore apart anyone in their path. On the ridge to the left, German panzers, likely Mammoth Tigers from the 103rd SS Heavy Panzer Battalion, opened fire at almost point-blank range, while high-velocity shells from other Tiger tanks and anti-tank and flak guns positioned across the Orne found their mark as the promised smokescreen either proved ineffective or failed to materialize altogether. Dirt, grain, bodies, and body parts flew in all directions. The ground shook with every step. And Preen goes on to say, he said, scarcely anybody looked for cover. It looked like waves of men rolling steadily forward, no sign of panic, despite their visible losses. To us, soldiers with 4 or 5 years experience, this was most unreal. And one of the few survivors, Bruce Duckett, said it, and again, you know, they can't see the disaster because the wheat is up to here, right? And so it's very isolating on top of everything else. It's like charging through the wheat field at Antietam, if you've been to see that. It's the sound that haunts you. The first thing you noticed was how loud it was. Machine guns firing, bullets whipping through the grain that sounded like wasps, shells landing, men shouting orders, and wounded screaming. Screeching metal and the clang of bullets and shell fragments meeting body armor, shovels, picks, or helmets, and the smell of the cordite from the blasts. It stunk. So they make it to the rise, and they get to the rise. They realize they can't go back. Their last foo has been killed. And then what they notice is the Germans deliberately look for the radio operators. So they look for the antennas sticking up in the grass, and they direct their fire at what little radio equipment they have. So that's knocked out. So they are totally alone. Most likely, most of them are killed just as they get up to where those trees are, but they kind of continue to stumble forward. And there's another passage in here. He says, it's the pride of the regiment. The Black Watch goes forward. Griffin is killed somewhere just at the top of the rise, and before he's killed, he tells people, get out of here, but they don't know what that means. So some try to go back and some go forward. And as the guys that are trying to go back, by the way, back at the mine, they didn't get all the Germans, and there are snipers in the mine, and they're popping these guys, the wounded that are trying to get back to the cabbage patch. And so eventually the last few survivors, or the last remnants, will basically be wiped out in this field here. So of the 320 men in that battalion of the Black Watch, 20 answer the roll the next day. Battalion gets reconstituted, and then in October, it gets wiped out again. So the Black Watch will have the distinction of being the Canadian regiment that suffers the highest casualties.
So out of the three, it was
320.
320 and 20
answer the roll. Yeah.
The next day. And how many of the 300 were wounded as opposed to killed?
Well, I know it was about 122, as I recall now, were wounded, and 80 are taken prisoner, and the rest are
killed.
Yeah.
Are killed. Wow. Did you ever talk to any of the guys who were
Yeah,
there?
well, I many years ago, I used to go to the Black Watch reunions up in Montreal, and so July 25th was always a day that, you get a lot of kind of quiet moments when the guys would talk about it, and it was a day that really struck them, and ever since I met them, it was an event I was always fascinated by. So, I'd been before, and David O'Keefe, who's been on our show a bunch of times, has written a really wonderful book about that attack. But it was nice to bring people there and make some folks aware of it.
Yeah, and you read a little quote from his book,
Yeah.
and that was really excellent.
Yeah.
So our next piece is from Erik Flint, and recorded at Crisbeck Battery, and I think I'm not going to say anything in introduction of this.
It's it's very interesting, and it's one of those fights that more people should know something about.
Right, these Crisbeck and what's the other battery?
Azaville. It's like two batteries for the price of one.
Yeah, and they're up there on the Cotentin Peninsula, and it's part of the drive for Cherbourg, and they are holding up the folks who've come off Utah Beach, and so Erik talks a little bit about that.
This is an excellent example of two mutually supporting defensive positions. The initial thing to note about the Crisbeck battery is its main guns are massive 210 centimeter guns. They are naval guns. Walter Olmsen, Oberleutnant zu Marine, I think, basically, Olmsen is a Kriegsmarine guy. In fact, he, as a young first lieutenant, started out in the Weimar Navy in the 1920s. Eventually makes it all the way up to the rank of chief boatswain's mate. He's quite a performer. He gets a commission, and eventually will find himself here in command of this battery. And the reason I say that is we look at a lot of the artillery positions along the Atlantic Wall, and there's essentially two types. You've got the weapon systems, which are fixed Army artillery. They're looking at the invasion beaches. These are actual naval guns where the crews are trained to track and fire on ships. That's a whole different skill set than being a regular ground artillery folks. So that's what Olmsen's doing in charge here. According to the German records, on D-Day, so I want to make sure I got at 05, Olmsen is the first person to spot the invasion fleet. By the way, the Utah Beach, where it actually is, go straight that way about 6 miles, and then that'll get you to Utah. So this is how quickly things happen. Olmsen spots the fleet at 05. He calls up to his command up in Cherbourg. At 5:52, the order to fire on the ships is given, and beginning at 5:55, once all the crews get set up, you begin this duel between the Crisbeck battery and the USS Quincy and the USS Tuscaloosa, and also throw in the battleship Nevada. And as this is going back and forth, I'm trying to think, what was it? The first hit on gun number 1, the Nevada hits that, takes that gun out. At about, pardon me, let me jump back. At 6:30, the USS Quincy, which is the only ship supposedly sunk by German shore fire. Now, of course, the Germans claim that they sunk it, but there's also a lot of evidence to show that the Quincy actually went into a minefield and was sunk by a mine. There's some photographs of some near misses out at the Quincy, but this is the classic shore battery naval ship duel. So this firing is going all day long. They eventually bring in 2 additional battleships that were supposed to be down at Omaha, and it's the Texas and Texas and the Arkansas come in because it's that much of a threat. When the guns here are knocked out, Olmsen actually getting direction from one of the main Widerstandsnest 2, which is down here to the south closer to Omaha Beach, says, hey, if you can't fire on the ships, can you help us out? So they begin firing on Utah Beach, and their fire is extremely effective. And that's part of what really makes it critical for the 4th Infantry to push their way up here. And just like Matt said, their job was to come in off Utah Beach, hook right, and head north. The original plan to take the whole peninsula, the original order called for the 4th Division to be on the right of the peninsula and the 90th Division to be on the left. It was just going to be a 2-division assault north. Things didn't turn out as planned, and this is you can turn around and see, there's the water. There's the English Channel. So out there, you've got the 3rd Battalion pushing to the north. Coming up towards Crisbeck, you've got the 1st Battalion. And then further to the west, you've got the 2nd Battalion. And what happens on the 7th, again, Matt was talking about this, the 1st Battalion starts working its way up here. They get into the town of San Marcouf, but Olmsen, who is assisted here by some guys from the 919th Panzer Grenadier Regiment, they actually move towards San Marcouf. They bring some 75s. They put effective fire on the 1st Battalion, and the 1st Battalion is not able to make it up this far. The initial attack gets turned back, and what happens is you get a back and forth. At one point, 1st Battalion is actually the furthest north. 3rd Battalion's running into a lot of trouble here along the shoreline. 2nd Battalion out to the west is also running into a stiff resistance. So what happens is 1st Battalion finds itself in a salient with their flanks exposed because the other 2 flank battalions have been pushed back. So given the fire support from Azaville, and like Matt talked about, with Olmsen calling in the Screaming Mimis and Naval Werfers on this position, there's no way that they can attack. The Germans immediately counterattack, and they attack once again when the battalion goes about 1 kilometer south to that little town of Dodenville. The Germans, right after midnight, do another counterattack and pushes the battalion further back. So over the next couple of days, all the way up until 8th and 9th, there's a succession of fights back and forth, but there's no way we can take this. The decision is ultimately made, we're going to bypass. And so they leave behind a task force which consisted of those poor bastards from Charlie Company 122 who've been beating their heads against the wall, except this time they're also given a company of tank destroyer support. So they isolate Crisbeck while the rest of the division continues to push north. Because of some of the issues that the 4th Division was running into, they got an additional battalion assigned to them from 139 1st Battalion 39th Infantry Regiment, which is coming out of the 9th Division. So while all this is happening, the 9th Division, which is coming on about D+4, landing at Utah Beach, they're heading straight west. Their job in conjunction with the 82nd is to cut off the peninsula.
like I said, the original plan, you would have the 4th Division and the 90th Division. Well, when the 90th is pulled out of consideration, Lawton Collins, the Corps commander, gets with Bradley and says, we need to do a 3-division assault. They replaced the 90th with a 79th. So what you've got is you've got the 9th Division. It's hit the west coast of the peninsula. It's going to fight north. The 4th Division, reinforced with that battalion from the 39th Regiment, is pushing north. They've bypassed Chris back here. And then you've got the 79th Division, an untested division, but one that has a great World War I history, the Cross-Lorraine Division. They're going to head straight up the middle, and Matt's going to talk about that. And all 3 of those divisions are going to converge on Cherbourg.
And then, Chris, for our last piece, I want to go back to a piece that you did, a segment that you did in the town of Rotz. And can you set that up for us?
Yeah, well, just there's one of the most famous photographs of the war is taken of a young SS Panzer Grenadier, and he's just come back from a failed attack, and he's looking at some horrific scenes in front of him, and a photographer comes and captures this moment, and then that picture goes out throughout Germany and later gets shown around the world. But it was fascinating to actually go to the spot where the photograph was taken, and we were able to find a photograph of this young man when he first goes into the army, and after his first moment of combat. And I in no way want to glorify him or his organization or his side, but it's just a graphic way to illustrate how quickly conflict can change you. I thought it's a very interesting spot.
All right, here we go.
The attack is going to be launched by 12 Panther tanks, supported by about 40 infantrymen, Panzer Grenadiers, and they start to move on the Canadians with very little reconnaissance. The attack is launched very, very hastily, and they shoot up some Canadian anti-tank guns, and they think, okay, well, we silenced them. Well, they don't make sure they silence them, and one of the guns gets back in operation, starts taking pot shots at these Panthers. Doesn't hit any of them, but it causes a bit of a slowdown. And then just as that's happening, Canadians tanks from the Fort Garry Horse and the 1st Hussars, these units had been shot up earlier in the day pretty badly, and they're bringing fresh tanks up to the front line. And these just happen to be Fireflies. And a Firefly is a Sherman tank with a 17-pounder gun, so it's bigger than the normal gun, which means it can knock out a tank. So pretty quickly, almost immediately, 7 of the 12 Panthers just boom go up, and the rest of the Panzer Grenadiers get shot up along this railroad embankment. And just to show, I'll just pass this around. This picture here is taken just a few days after that attack goes. But this is one of the Panthers. You can look at how many holes they pop into this thing. But the Canadians observe that these kids are very fanatical, but they don't really have a lot of finesse. So that attack is bloodily repulsed. Now, what's interesting about that is that one of the commander of that tank unit, he doesn't take part in the attack because he's been wounded earlier, but is Ernst von Rippentrop's son. So von Rippentrop's son had been wounded earlier, and he commands the unit that goes in, but the reason he's not killed is because he's already been wounded. And there's a very famous photograph taken of him, a guy named Max Wunsch. Max Wunsch is riding a motorcycle, and Rippentrop's son is in the sidecar. And that's taken just down here. We'll walk down there if you want, just for a photo. But the kids are really shaken up by that attack. And one of the first things, the remnants, they are here in this alley. And an SS photographer comes up to take a picture of them because their officers are saying, it's okay, you did okay, the Fuhrer still loves you, whatnot. So I want to show you this picture. So this is a kid named Otto Funk. And this is one of the most famous pictures of the war. Okay, and that is taken right here. Close up. Look into his eyes. So this is after his first combat.
Just 1,000 yards too.
That's after his first time in combat. And then, is that one of him? When you compare that to, this was him before his first combat. So compare those two photographs, just how quickly the shock of combat. I just find that a very kind of telling sequence. But again, you see this in every single Normandy book, every single World War II book. And what he's staring at in this picture is right across the street is one of the 5 Panthers that survives this attack, and inside of it is the decapitated body of the tank commander, and the gunner of that tank, who's 17 years old, has been ordered to wash out the tank so they can use it again. So see, he's sitting on the back of the tank pouring water to try to get the blood off the tank. All these, fanatical little bastards all of a sudden realize that this isn't Boy Scout camp anymore, and they're staring at this. And so Wunsch comes over and talks to them, and that's why they take these pictures. He will go on to, he's one of the few, but he'll actually survive the war. And he dies in 2011. But he's 17 when that first picture's taken, he's 18 when the picture's taken. They age very, but again, I think that's why it's very effective to look at those two together. You see just how quickly the shock of this it'll change your appearance.
Yeah.
So one of the things I was wondering about that is how did you find that spot? I mean, there's a marker there, so
Right.
obviously it's a known spot. But how long have you kind of known about that?
Well, I've known about it for years, and I kind of thought I'd sussed it out, during one of my Canadian trips many years ago, but was never really quite sure. So I spent a lot of time with first-person accounts and maps, and I kind of zeroed in on some options. And of course, like so much in life, I was late, so by the time I felt really comfortable with that, they'd put up a marker. But other than that, it was a fascinating.
They're monitoring you.
I know, right? Yeah, it was fascinating to do the work and to actually kind of see it bear fruit.
Yeah, so I've had that experience with the Ghost Army of trying to figure out where things happen, where we're peering through reports and contradictory information and photos and interviews and trying to put it together to see what happened.
And to not look really dumb when you get there.
Right, not to be wrong. And,
that's
and end up,
helpful.
having it get put into a book or a historical marker or a documentary. None of those things have happened to me
Not
yet.
that you know.
But,
You're not speaking from experience at all.
But stay tuned, right? So, do you have on the masterclass so far? We have not prepped this question. Do you have a favorite spot or a favorite moment?
Standing where the Black Watch was. That's for me very special. And you?
And you don't get to do it very often.
No, and I don't get to do it very often. So it meant a lot to go there for myself, and also it meant a lot to have a chance to show other people.
So we visited yesterday Fort de Rule in Cherbourg, and underneath Fort de Rule, the Germans used dynamite to make this huge array of tunnels and gun emplacements, and I just found that we went in. We had to all wear hard hats.
I know.
Lights on. You looked marvelous,
Oh, thank
by
you.
the way. But that was for me. No, but seeing that space and then just thinking about not just the Germans, but everybody, the level of detail that they went into in war preparations, in development of machinery, in development of fortifications, in training, in changing the whole society. I mean, it's really unlike anything that's ever happened. And that was a reminder of that.
Yeah, no, that was a neat sight. Plus, seeing you in an orange miner's helmet was really quite a treat.
I'll see if we can't arrange a photo here in the show for that. Hey, next week we're going to
stay in Normandy.
We're going to stay in Normandy, even though, you'll be back.
I'll be home.
You'll be home, and I'll be in Luxembourg.
Ooh, look at you.
But next week we're going to talk to Stephen Rabe, who's the author of The Lost Paratroopers of Normandy, and it's a story about that happens in a town called, I guess, Granges,
Granier.
And it's kind of midway between St. Lo here and Omaha Beach, and it's some unusual happenings that involve paratroopers and German soldiers and French civilians.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be next week's show. So please subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, shout at us on Twitter, listen to our podcast, back us on Patreon, and browse
historyhappyhour.com. Stay safe, everyone.